On the evening of my retirement celebration, my son presented me with an ultimatum I never saw coming. After 40 years of teaching and saving every penny, Michael looked me in the eyes and said, "Mom, Rebecca and I need your financial support. Either move in with us to help with the baby or transfer your retirement savings to us. You won't need it anyway." I didn't yell. I didn't break down. Instead, I thanked him for clarifying exactly where I stood in his life, went home, and called Oakwood Gardens the most exclusive senior living community in the state. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't anger, it's choosing yourself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had spent 32 years teaching literature at Westfield High School, guiding generations of young minds through the complexities of Shakespeare, Austen, and Morrison. My classroom had been my sanctuary, a place where ideas mattered more than status, where growth was measured in understanding rather than dollars. I had raised Michael on my own after his father walked out when our son was just 4 years old. Every decision I made, from the modest house I purchased in a good school district to the extra tutoring I paid for when Michael struggled with mathematics, had been carefully calculated to give him advantages I never had. The irony wasn't lost on me that after decades of putting his needs first, I had finally reached a moment meant to be about my accomplishment. My retirement dinner was supposed to be a celebration of this milestone, the beginning of a new chapter, after a lifetime of service. The faculty lounge had been transformed for the occasion, streamers and balloons adding festive colors to the normally utilitarian space. Colleagues had prepared speeches, former students had sent video messages, and the principal had presented me with a crystal apple engraved with my years of service. I felt valued, appreciated, and ready for whatever came next. Michael arrived late, his fiancée Rebecca in tow, her 5-month pregnant belly prominently displayed in a tight dress that seemed inappropriate for a school function. They circulated minimally, Rebecca's disinterest in meeting my colleagues, palpable as she scrolled through her phone during conversations. When they did engage, the questions were perfunctory, their attention elsewhere. "So proud of you, Mom," Michael said during his brief toast, though his eyes kept drifting to his. "Watch. You've earned your rest." There was something in his tone, a calculated quality that reminded me of his father during those final months before he left us. It should have been my first warning. As the gathering wound down, Michael suggested we continue the celebration at Giovanni's, my favorite Italian restaurant. "My treat," he insisted, an unusual generosity that should have been my second warning. The restaurant was quiet for a Tuesday evening, our table nestled in a corner that afforded privacy. Michael ordered an expensive bottle of wine, raising his glass in another toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Over pasta primavera, Michael began outlining what he called sensible plans for the future. "You'll be selling the house, of course," he stated, as if it were already decided. "No point in maintaining all that space and expense now that you're retired." "Actually, I hadn't planned on selling," I replied, setting down my fork. "I love my garden, and the mortgage is paid off. My expenses will be quite manageable." Rebecca exchanged a look with Michael that made something tighten in my chest. It was the look of people who had already had this conversation without me. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss," Michael continued, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used in his sales career. "Rebecca and I have been thinking about your situation, and we've come up with a proposal that makes sense for everyone." I noticed he was using "we," though Rebecca remained silent, examining her manicure with apparent fascination. "My situation?" I repeated, something defensive rising in me. "I wasn't aware I had a situation that needed your attention." Michael leaned forward, his expression a practiced blend of concern and authority. "Mom, you're 65. Living alone in that big house isn't practical. What if you fall? What if there's an emergency? I'm in excellent health, Michael. I swim 3 times a week and walk 5 miles daily. My voice remained measured despite the growing unease I felt. Besides, Helen next door checks in regularly and I have a security system. That's not the same as family looking after you, he countered. Look, here's what makes sense. You sell the house and either move in with us to help with the baby when it arrives. Rebecca will need the support. Or you could transfer your retirement savings to us for a larger home where we could give you your own space. Rebecca finally looked up. We found the perfect property in Lakeside Estates. 5 bedrooms, so there's room for a nursery and a home office for Michael. The market there is competitive, though. We'd need to move quickly. The pieces clicked into place with stunning clarity. This wasn't about my well-being. This was about accessing my assets. And what exactly would I contribute to this perfect property? I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. Michael had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Well, we thought your house proceeds plus most of your retirement fund would cover the down payment. It's an investment in our family's future. Our family, I repeated slowly, noting how the concept seemed to include my money, but not my autonomy. You've always said family comes first, Michael pressed, reaching for my hand across the table. This way, you'd have security with us, and your savings would go towards something meaningful instead of just sitting in an account. I gently withdrew my hand from his. And if I prefer to keep my house and manage my own retirement funds? The flash of annoyance that crossed his face was brief but unmistakable. That would be short-sighted, Mom. You're not getting any younger. Eventually, you'll need care. Retirement homes are expensive. They could drain everything you've worked for. This way, your money stays in the family. With you as the primary beneficiary, I clarified. Rebecca interjected, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold. We're thinking practically here, Eleanor. If you insist on independence now but need assisted living later, what happens when your money runs out? Michael and I will have our own retirement to consider, plus the baby's college fund. The presumption was breathtaking. They had already allocated my resources in their minds, reducing me to either an unpaid nanny or a financial resource to be tapped before it ran out. I looked at my son, the boy whose science fair projects I had helped build at midnight, whose sports games I had never missed despite crushing workloads, whose college education I had funded through second jobs and careful budgeting. Somewhere, along the way, that thoughtful boy had been replaced by this man who saw me not as a person with my own dreams and dignity, but as a means to his ends. Let me make sure I understand, I said finally, folding my napkin with deliberate precision. You're suggesting I either surrender my financial independence to subsidize your new home or serve as unpaid household help for your growing family. Michael's smile tightened. That's putting it rather extremely. We're talking about practical family arrangements, not servitude. Practical for whom? I asked quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The waiter approached with dessert menus, sensed the tension, and discreetly retreated. I think I'll pass on dessert, I said, reaching for my purse. Thank you for dinner, Michael. It's been illuminating. Mom, don't be difficult about this. Michael's voice took on an edge I recognized from his teenage years, the tone he used when denied something he felt entitled to. We're trying to help you. I stood, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. No, you're trying to help yourselves to what I've spent a lifetime building. There's a difference. As I walked toward the door, Michael called after me. You need to think about this rationally. At your age, you can't afford to make emotional decisions. I turned back one last time. I'm making perhaps the most rational decision of my life. I'm choosing to value myself as much as I once valued you. Driving home, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. For decades, I had defined myself through the lens of motherhood, measuring my success by my son's happiness and achievements. Somewhere in that process, I had allowed Michael to believe that my purpose extended no further than fulfilling his needs. That night, sitting in my garden beneath a sky scattered with stars, I made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just hours before. I wasn't going to fight Michael or try to reason with him. I wasn't going to sacrifice my remaining years to prove my love or worth. Instead, I was going to embrace this unexpected freedom to reinvent my life entirely on my own terms. The next morning, I called Oakwood Gardens and scheduled a tour for that afternoon. Then I phoned my attorney to begin the process of protecting my assets and revising my will. By the time Michael realized the implications of his ultimatum, I would be settled in a new life where my value wasn't measured by what I could provide to others, but by the dignity and joy with which I lived each day for myself. Oakwood Gardens exceeded every expectation. Unlike the sterile clinical facilities I had visited when researching options for my late friend Judith, this senior living community resembled a boutique resort. Set on 15 landscaped acres, the main building featured elegant architecture with abundant natural light, while cottage-style residences dotted the perimeter for residents desiring more privacy. We focus on vibrant independent living with flexible support options as needs evolve, explained Victoria Winters, the community relations director guiding my tour. With her crisp linen suit and warm, direct manner, Victoria struck me as someone who genuinely understood the complex emotions surrounding this transition. Most of our residents don't come here because they need care, she continued as we walked through a spacious art studio where several residents worked on paintings. They come because they want freedom from home maintenance, access to enriching activities, and a community of peers entering a similar life stage. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The amenities were impressive. A heated indoor pool, well-equipped fitness center, gourmet dining options, a theater, library, and gardens designed for both beauty and accessibility. The calendar posted in the central atrium listed discussion, groups, excursions, concerts, and classes ranging from watercolor painting to digital photography. What about long-term financial planning? I asked, aware that luxury came with corresponding costs. I want to ensure I'm making a sustainable decision. Victoria nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right question. Too many people make this decision emotionally without considering the financial implications. She outlined their various payment models, including the equity membership option that would allow me to exchange the value of my home for guaranteed lifetime residence with full services. By the end of the tour, I found myself sitting in a sun-drenched corner apartment with views of the central gardens, imagining my books on the built-in shelves, my mother's quilt draped over the sofa, and my collection of botanical prints adorning the walls. I could picture morning coffee on the small balcony, afternoons in the garden, evenings attending lectures or concerts. Most people need time to consider, Victoria said, handing me a detailed information packet. This is a significant decision. Actually, I replied, surprising myself with my certainty, I'd like to begin the application process today. Sometimes, you just recognize the right path when you see it. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, but her professional demeanor remained intact. Of course. May I ask what's prompting such a decisive response? Many of our residents deliberate for months. I considered my answer carefully. I recently received unexpected clarity about my priorities for this next chapter. I don't want to spend my retirement years being valued primarily for what I can provide to others rather than who I am. Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. After 30 years in her position, she had undoubtedly heard countless variations of my situation. Family dynamics often crystallize around retirement transitions, she acknowledged diplomatically. Your timing is fortunate. We actually have 3 residences becoming available next month, including a premium corner unit in the main building. On my drive home, I felt none of the melancholy I had anticipated. Instead, I experienced something I hadn't felt since receiving my first teaching position decades ago, the exhilarating combination of certainty and possibility. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was making a life decision based solely on what I wanted, not what would benefit others or meet external expectations. That evening, I sorted through the detailed information from Oakwood Gardens, creating a meticulous financial plan. My pension as a career educator was modest, but dependable. The equity from my house would cover the initial membership fee with enough remaining for a reasonable investment portfolio. My retirement savings, the very funds Michael had presumed, to allocate toward his new home, would remain untouched as security against future medical needs or special experiences I might wish to pursue. The numbers aligned perfectly. I could maintain complete financial independence while securing my future needs, without becoming either a burden or a resource to be exploited. I was finalizing these calculations when my doorbell rang. Through the sidelight, I recognized Michael's silhouette, his posture radiating the tense energy that had characterized his visits since childhood, whenever he wanted something I might not provide. "Mom, we need to talk," he said as I opened the door, stepping past me into the entryway without waiting for an invitation. "You left the restaurant before we could finish our discussion." "I believe we finished it quite thoroughly," I replied, following him into the living room where he had already seated himself in what had always been his chair during visits. "Your position was remarkably clear." "You're overreacting," he sighed, the dismissive tone sending a familiar pulse of frustration through me. "This is exactly why we're concerned about your decision-making. Emotional responses aren't helpful when planning for your future care needs." I took a seat across from him, noting with sudden clarity how this physical arrangement, him in the power position, me in the role of listener, had become our standard dynamic. "Not today." "Michael," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I've made a decision about my future, and I'd like you to respect it as coming from a rational, capable adult who happens to be your mother." His expression shifted to something between confusion and alarm. "What decision?" "I've applied for residence at Oakwood Gardens Senior Living Community. I'll be selling this house and establishing myself there next month." Whatever reaction I had anticipated, perhaps concern about the costs or protests about being separated from family, what transpired was revealing in its immediacy. "Oakwood Gardens! That place costs a fortune!" Michael sputtered, his face flushing. "That's completely irresponsible. What happens when you burn through your savings on unnecessary luxury? Who do you think will have to take care of you then?" I noted how quickly his expressed concern for my welfare had transformed into anxiety about potential financial responsibility. "I've developed a comprehensive financial plan that ensures my complete independence for the remainder of my life, including provisions for advanced healthcare needs should they arise." "But your money," he began, then caught himself. "I mean, your security would be better protected if we pooled our resources as a family." "With you as the primary decision-maker," I added. "I'm just trying to be practical here." His voice rose in frustration. "You're making a rash decision that affects all of us." "That's where you're mistaken," I replied evenly. "My retirement funds and how I choose to live affect me, not you. Your sense of entitlement to my resources is exactly why this decision is necessary." Michael stood abruptly, pacing the room with agitated energy. "What about Rebecca? What about your grandchild? Don't they matter to you?" It was a calculated appeal, targeting the very instinct that had guided most of my adult decision-making, prioritizing family needs above my own. But something fundamental had shifted within me. Of course they matter, but caring about my grandchild doesn't require sacrificing my autonomy or financial security. I look forward to being a grandmother who is present and supportive, from a position of independence, not dependence. This is about Dad, isn't it? Michael pivoted, his tone accusatory. You're still bitter about him leaving, so you're punishing me. The attempt to reframe my decision as emotional rather than rational was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. This has nothing to do with your father. This is about me recognizing, perhaps belatedly, that I deserve to be the protagonist of my own life story, not merely a supporting character in yours. Michael's expression hardened. Fine. If you want to waste your money on some fancy retirement village instead of helping your family, that's your choice. But don't expect us to rearrange our lives when you realize you've made a mistake. I won't, I assured him, just as you shouldn't expect me to fund your life choices at the expense of my own. After he left, without resolution, without understanding, I returned to my financial planning with renewed conviction. The confrontation had only confirmed what I already knew. My decision wasn't just financially sound, it was emotionally necessary. The dynamics between us had become unhealthy, with Michael viewing me primarily as a resource rather than a person with valid needs and dreams of my own. That night, I began sorting through my possessions, identifying what would come with me. To my new home, what would be donated, and what might be offered to Michael if he expressed interest. The process was surprisingly liberating. Each item represented a decision, a choice about what parts of my past deserved to accompany me into this next chapter. As I carefully wrapped my grandmother's china in acid-free tissue, I reflected on how often women of my generation had been conditioned to view our worth through the lens of what we provide to others. We were taught to find fulfillment in sacrifice, to measure success by our children's achievements rather than our own, to believe that putting ourselves last was somehow virtuous rather than destructive. My move to Oakwood Gardens wasn't just a practical housing decision. It was a declaration of independence, an assertion that my remaining years would be lived with intention rather than obligation. I was reclaiming my right to prioritize my own joy, growth, and well-being after decades of putting others first. As dawn broke over my garden, I felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever tensions might persist with Michael, whatever adjustments awaited in my new community, I knew with absolute certainty that I was finally honoring the woman I had always been beneath the roles I had played, a woman of courage, intelligence, and dignity, who deserved to live authentically in the time that remained to her. The 6 weeks between my decision and my actual move to Oakwood Gardens passed in a flurry of purposeful activity. I approached the transition with the same methodical organization I had applied to lesson planning throughout my teaching career. Each day brought a new checklist: home appraisal arrangements, meetings with my financial advisor, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, and completing the detailed intake process for Oakwood. My real estate agent, Diane, a former student who had blossomed from a shy teenager into a confident professional, walked through my home with a thoughtful eye. The market is strong right now, especially for well-maintained properties in established neighborhoods, she explained, making notes on her tablet. Your gardens alone will be a significant selling point. Not many homes in this area have such mature landscaping and thoughtful design. The hydrangeas were my first planting project, I told her, looking out at the blue-purple blooms that had become my signature in the neighborhood. 28 years ago, just after moving in. Diane paused, perhaps hearing the hint of nostalgia in my voice. Are you certain about this timing, Eleanor? There's no rush if you're feeling uncertain. I'm not uncertain, I clarified. Just appreciative of what this home has been for me. But a house should be lived in fully, not maintained as a museum to past chapters. It's time for another family to create their memories here. With Diane's expert guidance, we set a realistic asking price slightly above market value, accounting for the property's excellent condition and unique features. We'll highlight the gardens, the updated kitchen, and the home office that could serve as a nursery or guest room, she proposed. I suggest limited staging since your own furnishings already present the space beautifully. Meanwhile, Victoria from Oakwood Gardens connected me with their transition coordinator, Marcus. who specialized in helping new residents navigate the downsizing process. At 60-something himself with a background in interior design, Marcus brought both professional expertise and personal understanding to our planning sessions. The key is identifying what truly matters, he advised during his first visit to my home. Not what should matter or what others think should matter, but what resonates genuinely with you. Together, we created a floor plan for my new apartment, mapping precisely where each piece of furniture would go. This concrete planning made the abstract concept of moving tangible and specific. I could visualize exactly how my life would reconfigure in this new space, not diminished, but thoughtfully distilled to its most meaningful elements. For the more emotional task of sorting through personal items, I developed a systematic approach. Each evening after dinner, I would select one cabinet, drawer, or shelf to evaluate. Some decisions were easy. The complete works of Jane Austen would come with me. The mismatched collection of travel mugs could be donated. Others required deeper reflection. The ceramic vase Michael had made in 7th grade. The photo albums documenting family vacations that now seemed to belong to a different lifetime. For these more complex choices, I created a middle category: items to photograph and release. By digitally preserving the memory while relinquishing the physical object, I found a balance between honoring my past and embracing a less encumbered future. Throughout this process, Michael remained notably absent. He had called once, ostensibly to check on my hasty decision, but our conversation quickly revealed his continued focus on financial matters rather than my emotional well-being. "Have you considered the tax implications of selling the house?" he asked, bypassing any inquiries about how I was managing the transition. "You should really consult with our family accountant before finalizing anything." "I've engaged my own financial advisor," I informed him, the boundary in my voice unmistakable. "She's helping me structure everything to maximize my long-term security." His silence conveyed more than words could have: disappointment that I was proceeding independently, frustration that his assumed authority over my decisions had been firmly rejected. "The baby shower is next weekend," he finally said, changing tactics. "Rebecca was hoping you'd help with the arrangements, considering your entertaining experience." I recognized the attempt to reestablish the familiar dynamic, his needs automatically becoming my responsibility. "I'm afraid I won't be available. The real estate photographer is coming Saturday, and Sunday I'm meeting with the estate sale coordinator." "You're prioritizing your move over your first grandchild's celebration?" His tone carried accusatory disbelief. "I'm honoring commitments I've already made," I corrected gently. "I've sent a gift from the registry and contributed to the catering costs. My physical presence isn't essential to the success of the event." After we disconnected, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness that our relationship had become so transactional, relief at maintaining my boundaries, and a growing recognition that Michael's behavior hadn't developed in isolation. My decades of unconditional giving had enabled his sense of entitlement. This realization didn't excuse his actions, but helped me understand that changing our dynamic required changes from both sides. 3 days before my scheduled move, Diane called with exciting news. "We've received 4 offers on the house, all above asking price. 2 include escalation clauses, and 1 is an all-cash offer with minimal contingencies." The swift, positive response to my home listing felt like external validation of my decision. The universe seemed to be aligning to support this transition, opening doors as I prepared to walk through them. That evening, as I packed the last of my books, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rebecca standing on my porch, her pregnancy now more pronounced at 7 months. This was her first visit to my home without Michael, and her evident discomfort suggested this wasn't a social call. "May I come in?" she asked, her usual confidence notably subdued. I invited her into the living room, now partially packed with labeled boxes and considerably emptier than during her previous visits. She surveyed the visible signs of my impending departure with an unreadable expression. "Michael doesn't know." "I'm here," she began, perching awkwardly on the edge of the sofa. "He'd be furious if he knew." "What can I help you with, Rebecca?" I asked directly, not inclined toward dramatics. She twisted her engagement ring nervously, a gesture so at odds with her typically composed demeanor that it immediately captured my attention. "This isn't going how I expected," she admitted. "Michael assured me that you would eventually agree to our plan. He said you always put family first and would come around once you thought it through." He misunderstood my definition of putting family first, I replied. "It doesn't include compromising my autonomy or financial security." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to see that." She hesitated, then continued with unexpected candor. "The thing is, Eleanor, this house plan wasn't entirely Michael's idea. I pushed for it. My parents lost everything in the market crash of 2008, and they've struggled ever since. I swore I would never be financially vulnerable like that." The admission revealed a dimension to their proposal I hadn't considered, that Rebecca's insistence might stem from genuine fear rather than simple greed. It didn't justify their approach, but it offered context that softened my judgment slightly. "Financial security is important," I acknowledged, "but building it at someone else's expense isn't the solution." "I understand that now," she said, quietly. "Watching Michael's reaction to your decision has been educational. I've seen sides of him I wasn't prepared for." I waited, sensing she had more to share but needed to find her own way to it. "He's become obsessed with what he calls his lost inheritance," she continued. "He talks constantly about what he could have done with your retirement funds, how your decision is depriving our child of opportunities." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. It made me wonder what kind of father resents his unborn child's grandmother for choosing her own path. The insight showed a perceptiveness I hadn't previously credited to Rebecca. Perhaps there was more substance beneath her polished exterior than I had allowed myself to see. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. "Because I don't want my child growing up with that kind of entitlement," she answered, surprising. "Me again. And because I owe you an apology. I treated you as a means to an end rather than a person deserving respect. That was wrong of me." The acknowledgement was unexpected and oddly moving. It represented something Michael had thus far been unable to offer, recognition of my personhood beyond my utility to their plans. "Thank you for that," I said sincerely. "Apology accepted." Rebecca rose awkwardly, her pregnancy affecting her balance. "I should go, but I want you to know that whatever happens between you and Michael, I hope you'll still want a relationship with your grandchild. Children need grandmothers who model independence and self-respect." After she left, I continued packing with renewed purpose. Rebecca's visit had underscored an important truth. My decision to choose myself wasn't just about securing my own well-being. It was establishing a legacy of healthy boundaries and self-valuation that might benefit generations beyond me. The following morning, I awakened to an email from Victoria at Oakwood Gardens. "Your apartment is ready a day early if you'd like to begin moving in tomorrow. Also, I thought you might enjoy knowing that our resident book club is currently discussing Their Eyes Were Watching God. I recall you mentioning it was one of your favorites." This thoughtful personal touch reinforced my confidence in the community I was joining. Victoria wasn't merely processing another resident. She was welcoming a specific individual with unique interests and passions. It was precisely this recognition of personhood that had been missing from Michael and Rebecca's original proposal. As I stood in my garden one final time, saying goodbye to the plants I had nurtured for decades, I felt an unexpected sense of completion rather than loss. This home had served its purpose beautifully, sheltering my little family through difficult years, providing stability during Michael's childhood and offering me sanctuary during my demanding teaching career. Now it would continue its purpose for another family, while I embraced a new environment designed for my current season of life. The hydrangeas would bloom next summer without me there to witness them, but that didn't diminish the joy they had brought me or the care I had invested in them. Similarly, the relationship with my son might be evolving in painful ways, but that didn't erase the love I had given or the meaningful moments we had shared. Some investments yield returns beyond our presence or recognition. Their value exists, independently of our continued involvement. This realization brought a profound sense of peace as I prepared to cross the threshold into the next chapter of my life, a chapter where, perhaps for the first time, I was both author and protagonist. Of my own story, moving day arrived with unexpected serenity. The professional movers Victoria had recommended worked with impressive efficiency, treating my carefully curated possessions with respect as they transported them to Oakwood Gardens. Marcus, the transition coordinator, supervised the process, with meticulous attention to our previously established floor plan, ensuring each piece of furniture found its designated place in my new apartment. By mid-afternoon, the essential elements of my new home were in place. My reading chair sat positioned perfectly by the bay window. My grandmother's antique desk occupied the small study alcove, and my beloved bookshelves lined the living room wall, their contents organized by the same idiosyncratic system I had developed over decades of reading. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, standing beside me as we surveyed the transformed space. "Does it feel like home yet?" I considered the question thoughtfully. "It feels like the beginning of home," I replied. "The structure is there, but the living in part comes next." He nodded with understanding. "That's exactly right. The objects create the framework, but it's the daily rhythms and new memories that will truly make it yours." After the movers departed, I took a moment to absorb the quiet of my new surroundings. The apartment featured superior soundproofing, creating a peaceful sanctuary despite being part of a larger community. Through the windows, I could see the meticulous gardens with walking paths winding between flowering shrubs and ornamental trees. In the distance, a small group of residents played bocce on a manicured court, their laughter occasionally carrying on the breeze. My reflection was interrupted by a discreet knock at my door. Victoria stood there holding a small basket containing a bottle of champagne, 2 flutes, and an assortment of gourmet chocolates. "Welcome home," she said warmly. "I thought you might enjoy a small celebration once the moving chaos subsided." We stepped out onto my private balcony, where comfortable seating overlooked a tranquil koi pond. Victoria opened the champagne, with practiced ease, pouring 2 modest glasses. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her glass, "and to the courage they require." As we sipped the crisp champagne, Victoria shared insights about Oakwood Gardens that went beyond the official orientation materials. She mentioned which morning yoga instructor offered modifications for all ability levels, which chef was particularly accommodating of dietary preferences, and which weekly excursions tended to fill up fastest. "I noticed you listed discussion groups among your interests on your application," she commented. "Beyond our regular book club, we have several resident-led dialogues that might interest you. Dr. Lowell, a retired philosophy professor, hosts Contemporary Ethical Dilemmas on Tuesday evenings, and Marianne Foster, who was a foreign correspondent, for 30 years leads Global Perspectives on Thursday afternoons." The thoughtful personalization of her recommendations reinforced my conviction that Oakwood Gardens was not merely a housing arrangement, but a thoughtfully curated community where individual interests and contributions were valued. "There's something else I'd like to discuss," Victoria continued, her tone shifting slightly. "We have a tradition here of inviting new residents to consider sharing their expertise through our enrichment program. Given your background in literature education, would you have any interest in facilitating a reading group or perhaps offering a short course on a literary topic you're passionate about?" The invitation caught me by surprise. In the intensity of the transition, I had focused primarily on what I was leaving behind, rather than new possibilities awaiting me. The prospect of engaging with literature in a teaching capacity again, but this time entirely on my own terms, without standardized testing constraints or administrative pressures, sparked immediate interest. "I'd like that very much," I replied, ideas already forming. Perhaps a series on female authors who published later in life. There's something powerful about examining creativity that emerges after decades of other responsibilities. Victoria's eyes lit up. "That sounds fascinating, and particularly relevant to many of our residents. When you're settled, we can discuss the specifics." After Victoria departed, I continued unpacking the personal items that would transform the apartment from a well-appointed space into my unique home. I arranged family photographs on the built-in shelves, selecting images that celebrated meaningful moments rather than maintaining a comprehensive family record. Among them, I placed several photos of Michael's childhood and adolescence, choosing to honor the son I had raised rather than define our relationship solely by recent conflicts. As evening approached, I decided to explore the dining options for my first meal at Oakwood. The main dining room offered restaurant-style service with an impressive menu, while the more casual bistro provided lighter fare in a relaxed setting. Opting for the latter on this transitional day, I found myself seated at a small table overlooking the central courtyard. "Mind if I join you?" asked a voice to my left. I looked up to see a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes, impeccably dressed in casual slacks and a navy blazer. "I'm James Harriman. The staff mentioned we have a new resident, and I've appointed myself as one of the unofficial welcome committee." "Eleanor Miller," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from me, "and I'd appreciate the company." James proved to be a delightful dinner companion, witty, well-read, and refreshingly direct. A retired judge who had moved to Oakwood 3 years earlier after his wife's passing, he offered insights about the community from a resident's perspective. "The best advice I can give you," he said as we enjoyed dessert, "is to approach this transition as an exploration rather than a retreat. The people here have fascinating histories and ongoing passions. It's not a place where lives are winding down. Quite the opposite, in fact." "That's precisely what attracted me," I acknowledged. "The sense that this is a beginning rather than an ending." James nodded approvingly. "Exactly. My daughter initially worried I was giving up by moving here. She couldn't understand that. I was actually expanding my horizons, not narrowing them. The parallel to my situation with Michael was unmistakable, though I didn't share those details during this initial meeting. Instead, I asked James about his experiences with the various programs and activities available at Oakwood. "The key is selectivity," he advised. "There's a temptation to try everything at first, which can lead to the same overscheduled existence many of us maintained during our professional lives. I suggest identifying what truly energizes you and focusing there." His wisdom resonated deeply. Throughout my career, I had often sacrificed personal interests for professional responsibilities and family obligations. Now, with unprecedented freedom to shape my days, mindful selectivity would be essential to creating a fulfilling lifestyle rather than merely a busy one. After dinner, James invited me to join a small gathering in the community library where residents often congregated for coffee and conversation in the evenings. Walking through the elegantly appointed corridors, I was struck by how different this environment was from the institutional settings often associated with senior living. Every detail, from the original artwork adorning the walls to the comfortable seating arrangements designed for actual conversation, reflected a deep understanding of how physical spaces influence social connection and individual dignity. The library proved to be a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs, and a gas fireplace providing both warmth and ambiance. About a dozen residents were engaged in animated discussion when we arrived, but they immediately welcomed me into their circle with genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Eleanor was a literature teacher for 32 years, James mentioned as he introduced me. She's considering leading a course on female authors who found their voice later in life. Oh, I'd sign up for that immediately, enthused a petite woman with a stylish silver bob, introducing herself as Margaret. Have you included Penelope Fitzgerald in your planning? She published her first novel at 60 and went on to win the Booker Prize at 80. And what about Mary Wesley? Added another woman. She published her first adult novel at 70 and wrote 9 more before she died at 90. The conversation flowed naturally into a discussion of late blooming creativity across various fields, from Grandma Moses in painting, to Harriet Doer in literature, to Anna Mary Robertson in quilting. I found myself fully engaged, offering insights from my teaching experience while absorbing new perspectives from these accomplished individuals. As the evening progressed, I realized I was experiencing something I had missed profoundly since. Retirement, intellectual stimulation among peers who shared my love of ideas and analysis. The interaction held none of the hierarchical dynamics of faculty meetings or the careful navigation required in parent-teacher conferences. Instead, it offered the pure pleasure of exploration among equals, each bringing unique knowledge and experiences to the exchange. Walking back to my apartment after bidding goodnight to my new acquaintances, I felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from my life for longer than I cared to admit. The day had been physically taxing, but emotionally invigorating. I had relocated not just my possessions, but my perspective, from defining myself primarily through past roles and relationships to embracing new dimensions of identity and connection. As I prepared for my first night in my new home, I received a text message from an unfamiliar number. It was from Rebecca. Heard you completed your move today. Michael's still struggling with your decision, but I want you to know I respect your choice. When you're settled, I'd like to visit. Just me. The baby should know their grandmother in her own space, living her own life. Rest well. The message brought unexpected comfort, while Michael remained entrenched in his disappointment and resentment. Rebecca had demonstrated surprising growth. Her willingness to acknowledge my autonomy suggested possibilities for a relationship with my grandchild that would be based on mutual respect rather than obligation or utility. I composed a brief response. Thank you, Rebecca. Your message means a great deal. You'll be welcome here when the time feels right for both of us. Setting my phone aside, I moved to the bay window where moonlight illuminated the peaceful grounds. Tomorrow would bring further unpacking, an official orientation session, and the beginning of establishing daily rhythms in this new environment. The future stretched before me not as a diminished version of my previous life, but as an expansive landscape of possibilities I had never allowed myself to envision. The decision that had seemed so radical just weeks ago, choosing myself over others' expectations, now revealed itself as the most natural evolution imaginable. I hadn't abandoned my identity as a mother or grandmother. I had simply refused to be limited by those roles. In doing so, I had opened the door to discovering dimensions of myself that had remained dormant during years of prioritizing others' needs and dreams. As I drifted toward sleep in my new bedroom, surrounded by the carefully chosen possessions that reflected my true self rather than others' expectations, I felt profound gratitude for the uncomfortable clarity Michael's ultimatum had provided. Without that moment of stark revelation, I might have continued making incremental compromises until nothing remained of my authentic self or dreams. Instead, I had found the courage to rewrite the narrative of my later years, not as an epilogue to a story centered around others, but as an entirely new chapter in which I finally claimed the leading role in my own life. My first month at Oakwood Gardens unfolded with a gentle rhythm that gradually transformed the unfamiliar into the comfortable. Each morning began with a ritual I had longed for during my teaching years but rarely experienced, waking naturally, without an alarm, enjoying a leisurely breakfast on my balcony, and planning my day according to my own interests rather than external obligations. The orientation process at Oakwood was thorough, without being overwhelming. During my first week, I attended information sessions on the various amenities, met key staff members, and received a personalized wellness assessment from Dr. Sharma, the community's medical director. "Your overall health is excellent, Dr. Sharma noted during our consultation. Your commitment to swimming and walking has clearly paid dividends. I'd recommend adding some strength training to maintain bone density and muscle mass. Our fitness director can design a program specifically, tailored to your needs and preferences." This personalized approach exemplified what I was coming to appreciate most about Oakwood Gardens: the balance between supportive infrastructure and individual autonomy. Resources were readily available, but residents maintained complete control over how and whether to utilize them. By the third week, I had established a flexible routine that included morning water aerobics 3 times weekly, volunteer hours in the community library, and participation in both the literary discussion group and Judge Harriman's, James as he had asked me to call him, informal current events forum. The prospect of leading my own literary seminar on late-blooming female authors had evolved from idea to concrete plan. Victoria had connected me with the community's program coordinator, who helped develop a 6-session framework scheduled to begin the following month. Notices had been posted on the community bulletin boards and online portal, already generating significant interest among residents. "We've had 12 sign-ups in just 2 days, the coordinator informed me. Several residents mentioned they've been hoping for more literary programming with an academic foundation. The opportunity to share my knowledge and passion in this new context, free from administrative constraints and standardized curriculum requirements, rekindled an enthusiasm for teaching that had diminished during my final years at Westfield High. Here, I could focus entirely on the literary works and meaningful discussion rather than test preparation and bureaucratic documentation. As I settled into my new environment, I found myself forming connections more naturally than I had anticipated. The common areas at Oakwood, from the sunlit atrium to the beautifully designed gardens, fostered casual interactions that often developed into deeper conversations. Unlike my neighborhood of 30 years, where privacy had been zealously maintained and social interaction required deliberate planning, Oakwood created organic opportunities for community while still respecting individual boundaries. One such encounter occurred during an afternoon in the art studio, where I had gone to explore the watercolor supplies available to residents. Although I had never pursued painting seriously, I had always been curious about the medium and now had both the time and resources to explore it. "First time with watercolors?" asked a woman at the adjacent easel, observing my hesitant approach to the blank paper before me. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed, introducing myself. "Completely obvious," she confirmed with good-natured directness. "I'm Sophia Reeves, former architect, mediocre pianist, and enthusiastic watercolorist. Would you like some basic guidance to get started?" Over the next 2 hours, Sophia patiently demonstrated fundamental techniques: wet-on-wet washes, dry brush texturing, salt, effects, explaining each process with the clarity of someone who had not only mastered skills, but understood how to communicate them effectively. By the end of our impromptu session, I had produced a simple but satisfying landscape that captured the essence, if not the refinement, of watercolor's luminous quality. "Not bad for a first attempt," Sophia assessed, studying my painting with genuine interest rather than patronizing encouragement. "You have a good eye for composition. The technical aspects will come with practice." We ended our session with plans to meet the following week for further instruction, a commitment that would have seemed unlikely in my previous life, where art had been appreciated but never prioritized amid more pressing responsibilities. This pattern repeated itself across various activities: the hiking group that welcomed me despite my initial uncertainty about keeping pace, the technology workshop where I contributed my knowledge of digital research methods while learning, smartphone photography techniques from other participants, the community garden committee that immediately valued my experience with perennials, In each context, I discovered a fundamental difference between Oakwood's social dynamics and those I had experienced in previous phases of life. Here, relationships developed based on genuine shared interests and mutual respect, rather than proximity, circumstance, or obligation. There was an authenticity to these connections that felt both novel and deeply satisfying. This developing sense of community was tested when, during my 5th week at Oakwood, Michael finally requested to visit. His text message was brief and notably lacking in warmth. "Would like to see your new place, available Sunday afternoon." The prospect of his visit triggered conflicting emotions. Hope for reconciliation, tempered by wariness about his motives, desire for his approval complicated by my newfound independence from such external validation. After careful consideration, I responded with a specific time and the necessary information about visitor parking and check-in procedures. I mentioned the upcoming visit to James during our morning walk along Oakwood's wooded trail, having developed sufficient trust in his judgment to seek his perspective. "Family dynamics don't magically resolve because of a change in geography," he observed thoughtfully. "But physical context does influence interaction patterns. There's value in having him experience you in this environment rather than the home where certain roles were long established." "I'm concerned about his reaction," I admitted. He viewed my decision as rejection rather than self-determination. James considered this as we paused to observe a family of deer at the edge of the meadow. My experience as a judge taught me that when people react with disproportionate negativity to others' reasonable choices, it usually reveals more about their insecurities than about the choice itself. Your son may be confronting his own anxieties about independence and mortality through your decision. The insight resonated with aspects of Michael's behavior I had observed but not fully articulated. His reaction to my move had seemed excessive, for someone who theoretically wanted me to relocate anyway, suggesting deeper issues than the financial implications he emphasized. When Sunday arrived, I prepared for Michael's visit with deliberate intention. I arranged my apartment to showcase how successfully I had adapted my previous possessions to this new space. I scheduled our meeting between the community concert, which I genuinely wanted to attend, and dinner with James and several other residents, a standing arrangement I valued, subtly establishing that his visit was accommodated within an active, fulfilling life rather than serving as its focus. Michael arrived precisely at the appointed time, his expression difficult to read as he surveyed my apartment. "It's smaller than I expected," were his first words after a perfunctory greeting. "It's precisely the right size for my needs," I replied evenly. "Would you like the tour?" As we moved through the apartment, I highlighted the features that had made this transition so successful: the abundance of natural light, the thoughtful storage solutions, the private balcony that had already become my favorite reading spot. Michael listened with minimal response, his attention caught only when I mentioned the simplified maintenance that had freed my time for new pursuits. "What pursuits?" he asked, the first question suggesting genuine curiosity rather than criticism. I described my upcoming literary seminar, my exploration of watercolor painting, and my participation in the community's cultural excursions. Last week, we attended a chamber music performance at the university. Next month, we're visiting the botanical gardens during their international orchid exhibition. "We?" Michael's tone sharpened slightly. "The Oakwood Cultural Committee and interested residents," I clarified, refusing to be defensive about my developing friendships. "Would you like to see the community areas? The grounds are particularly beautiful this time of year." As we toured the broader facility, encountering other residents who greeted me by name with evident warmth, I observed Michael's demeanor gradually shifting. The dismissive skepticism he had brought with him was being challenged by the undeniable quality of both the physical environment and the community it fostered. In the main atrium, we encountered James engaged in conversation with another resident. He excused himself briefly to approach us. "You must be Michael," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Harriman, a friend of your mother's. She's mentioned you're expecting your first child soon. Congratulations." The simple social exchange, a respected professional acknowledging Michael as the son of someone he valued, seemed to momentarily disarm Michael's defensive posture. He responded with uncharacteristic politeness, even engaging briefly when James inquired about his work. After James departed, Michael and I continued to the gardens, where I had arranged for coffee to be served at one of the private seating areas overlooking the koi pond. As we settled into comfortable chairs, a staff member delivered an elegantly presented tray with coffee, fresh scones, and seasonal berries. "The service here is impressive," Michael acknowledged reluctantly. "It's more than service," I corrected gently. "It's respect. There's a fundamental difference between being treated as a customer and being valued as a community member." Michael focused on stirring his coffee with unwarranted intensity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a complexity of emotions I hadn't heard from him since childhood. "This isn't what I pictured when you said retirement community. I thought it would be clinical, depressing." He gestured vaguely. "Not like this." "What did you think I deserved?" I asked, the question genuine rather than confrontational. Michael looked up, momentarily startled by the directness of my inquiry. For the first time since our conflict began, I glimpsed uncertainty beneath his authoritative facade. "I didn't think about it in those terms," he admitted. "I guess I assumed any specialized senior living would be a step down from regular life. A compromise." "This isn't a compromise, Michael. It's a deliberately chosen environment that supports the life I want to live now." I paused, weighing whether to address the underlying issue directly. "The problem wasn't your concern about my living situation. It was your assumption that you should control that decision and my resources." Michael's expression tightened, but he didn't immediately reject my assessment as he might have weeks earlier. Perhaps experiencing the reality of my new life had made dismissal more difficult than when he could imagine me isolated and regretful. We parted with civil but cautious formality, the deeper reconciliation I might have hoped for still elusive. Yet, as I watched him walk toward the parking area, I felt neither anger nor disappointment, but rather a calm certainty that I had made the right choice regardless of his ability to recognize it. That evening, joining friends for dinner in the TI Residence's bistro, I shared aspects of Michael's visit, appreciating the thoughtful perspectives offered by those who had navigated similar family transitions. "My daughter took nearly a year to fully accept my move," Margaret confided. "Now, she brings my grandchildren to visit regularly and admits she was wrong about my decision." "And some family members never adjust," added Thomas, a retired professor whose dry wit masked genuine wisdom. "My brother still considers my move here an affront to family tradition. I consider his opinion an irrelevant footnote to my contentment." The laughter that followed carried the comfortable warmth of shared understanding, not just of specific circumstances, but of the broader journey toward reclaiming personal agency after decades of navigating others' expectations. In that moment of connection, I realized that beyond the physical comforts and practical conveniences Oakwood provided, I had found something far more valuable: a community that understood and validated the courage required to prioritize one's own well-being without apology or compromise. 2 months into my residency at Oakwood Gardens, my literary seminar on late-blooming female authors had become one of the community's most popular programs. What began as a modest offering with 12 participants had grown to 23 regular attendees, necessitating a move from the small conference room to the more spacious library. "You've awakened the academic impulses many of us thought we'd left behind," Margaret commented after a particularly spirited discussion of Penelope Fitzgerald's The Blue Flower. I find myself taking notes and researching between sessions, just as I did during my university days. The experience of facilitating these discussions differed profoundly from my high school teaching. Here, the participants brought decades of rich life experience to their literary analysis, connecting themes of late-life creativity, reinvention, and resilience to their own journeys. Our conversations moved fluidly between textual examination and personal reflection, creating an intellectual community that nourished both mind and spirit. My growing confidence in this new environment extended beyond the seminar room. I had begun serving on Oakwood's Resident Advisory Council, contributing to decisions about programming and community policies. My watercolor skills had progressed sufficiently under Sophia's guidance that 2 of my paintings had been selected for display in the quarterly resident art exhibition. Most significantly, I had developed genuine friendships that transcended the situational acquaintanceships of my previous life. James had become a particularly valued companion. Our morning walks had extended into regular dinner conversations, theater outings, and a shared interest in classical music that led to weekly listening sessions in the community's excellent media room. His thoughtful perspectives and understated humor provided both intellectual stimulation and emotional connection without the complications of romantic expectations. "Eleanor, you've brought a new energy to our little enclave," he remarked one evening as we returned from a chamber music performance. "You have this remarkable ability to engage with life as it presents itself now, without excessive dwelling on the past or anxiety about the future." The observation struck me as both accurate and ironic. Throughout my career and parenting years, I had been the practical planner, the one who anticipated problems and secured against contingencies. Only in this later chapter had I discovered the liberation of present-focused living. This hard-won equilibrium faced its first significant challenge on a crisp autumn morning when Victoria knocked gently on my apartment door, her expression conveying the seriousness of her unscheduled visit. "Eleanor, I apologize for interrupting your morning, but there's a situation I felt you should be aware of immediately," she began once I invited her inside. "Your son Michael contacted our administrative office yesterday with concerns about your financial arrangements." A chill of apprehension replaced my initial confusion. What kind of concerns? Victoria's professional demeanor remained intact, but her tone conveyed genuine empathy. "He inquired about the terms of your residency contract, specifically the equity membership option you selected. When informed that such details are confidential without resident authorization, he suggested he might seek legal counsel regarding your diminished capacity to make financial decisions." The words landed like a physical blow. After weeks of minimal contact following his visit, Michael had apparently decided to pursue a new strategy for accessing my resources, questioning my competence rather than merely my judgment. "I see," I said, working to maintain my composure. "And what response did the administration provide?" Our executive director explained that Oakwood conducts thorough cognitive assessments as part of our intake process, and that all our contracts require independent financial and legal review. "We made it clear that we have no concerns whatsoever about your decision-making capacity." Victoria paused. "However, I wanted you to be aware of this development, as family challenges of this nature sometimes escalate." After Victoria departed with assurances of the community's full support, I sat with the unsettling reality of Michael's actions. The implicit threat in his approach, suggesting he might seek to have me declared incompetent, represented a profound breach beyond our previous conflicts. This wasn't just disagreement about my choices, it was an attempt to remove my agency entirely. The rational part of my mind recognized the extreme unlikelihood of such efforts succeeding. My cognitive functions were excellent, my financial planning meticulous, and my decision-making well documented. Yet the emotional impact of having my own son question my competence struck at something fundamental. Rather than giving in to the hurt and anger rising within me, I reached for the telephone and called Patricia Winters, the attorney who had handled my financial restructuring before the move to Oakwood. Eleanor, good to hear from you. Patricia greeted me warmly. How are you settling into your new community? After briefly updating her on my positive transition, I explained the situation with Michael. Patricia listened without interruption, then responded with the clear-headed pragmatism I valued in her counsel. This is unfortunately not uncommon, she observed. When adult children feel excluded from financial decisions, they believe they should control. Some resort to questioning capacity as a legal strategy. The good news is that these efforts rarely succeed without substantial evidence of actual cognitive impairment or financial mismanagement. I want to ensure I'm fully protected, I stated firmly. What preventive measures would you recommend? Patricia outlined several options, including updated medical documentation of my cognitive health, a reinforced durable power of attorney specifically excluding Michael, and a letter from Oakwood, Gardens confirming their assessment procedures and ongoing observations of my functional capabilities. I'd also suggest a direct approach, she added. Sometimes clear communication about consequences can prevent escalation. Michael should understand that pursuing this path would not only fail legally, but would permanently damage your relationship. After concluding our call with plans for Patricia to prepare the necessary documentation, I found myself facing a decision about how to address Michael's actions directly. My instinct was to confront him immediately, to express my profound disappointment and hurt. But experience had taught me that responding from emotional reaction rarely led to productive outcomes. Instead, I decided to consult someone who might offer unique insight into Michael's perspective. That afternoon, I called Rebecca, who answered with evident surprise at seeing my name on her caller ID. Eleanor, is everything all right? I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time, I began, keeping my tone neutral. I wanted to check on how you're feeling as your due date approaches. Rebecca's initial wariness gave way to cautious conversation about her pregnancy, now in its 8th month. She described the nursery preparations, her mixed feelings about impending motherhood, and the prenatal classes she was attending alone since Michael found them unnecessary. When our conversation established sufficient rapport, I carefully approached the real purpose of my call. Rebecca, I've learned that Michael has contacted Oakwood's administration with concerns about my capacity to make financial decisions. I'm wondering if you were aware of this. The extended silence that followed provided its own answer before Rebecca spoke. I suspected he might do something like this, she finally admitted, her voice tight with evident discomfort. He's been meeting with a lawyer friend who specializes in elder law. I told him it was inappropriate, but he's convinced himself this is about protecting you rather than controlling your assets. And what do you believe it's about? I asked directly. Another pause, then. I think it's about his fear, not just of financial insecurity, but of what your independence represents. Rebecca's voice had taken on an unexpected maturity. Every choice you make that prioritizes your needs challenges his narrative about family obligation. Plus, we received the final rejection on our mortgage application for the lakeside house last week. He's been fixated on your resources ever since. The information provided crucial context without excusing Michael's behavior. After thanking Rebecca for her candor, I asked one final question. If you were in my position, how would you respond to this situation? Directly and decisively, she answered without hesitation. Michael responds to clear boundaries, not to emotional appeals. If there are consequences for this behavior, they need to be concrete and immediate. After ending our call, I sat with Rebecca's insights, integrating them with Patricia's legal advice and my own instincts about the situation. By evening, I had formulated a plan that balanced protection of my rights with the possibility, however remote, of eventual reconciliation. The following morning, I asked Victoria to accompany me to the business center, where I composed a formal letter to Michael. The document, composed with careful deliberation, began by acknowledging his expressed concerns about my welfare, while firmly establishing the inappropriateness of his approach. I am writing to inform you that I have been made aware of your inquiries regarding my competence and financial decision-making capacity, I wrote. While I recognize your stated concern for my well-being, I must be absolutely clear about the following points. First, my cognitive function has been professionally assessed and documented as excellent. I have arranged for updated neuropsychological evaluation, the results of which will be maintained by my attorney. Second, all financial decisions regarding my retirement have been made with professional guidance and independent legal review. These decisions prioritize my long-term security and reflect my clearly established values and preferences. Third, and most importantly, any further attempts to challenge my autonomy through legal mechanisms will result in immediate and permanent consequences for our relationship and for your position in my estate planning. I concluded with an alternative path forward. If you wish to rebuild trust and maintain a relationship with me and your child, I am open to facilitated family counseling once you have demonstrated respect for my autonomy through both words and actions. The choice is yours, as mine was to create a life that honors my needs after decades of prioritizing others. After signing the letter, I arranged for it to be delivered by certified mail, ensuring documentation of its receipt. Victoria, who had discreetly provided space for me to compose the document in privacy, offered her support as we walked back to my apartment. "You've handled this with remarkable clarity," she observed. "Many residents struggle with family members who cannot accept their independence, but few respond with such balanced strength." The validation was welcome, though it didn't entirely ease the sadness beneath my resolve. That evening, seeking both distraction and companionship, I joined a small dinner gathering in James's apartment, where several residents had organized an impromptu celebration of his 75th birthday. As we enjoyed the excellent meal prepared by Thomas, who had apparently been a skilled amateur chef throughout his academic career, conversation flowed easily among the diverse personalities gathered around the table. These people, who 6 months ago had been strangers, now constituted a vital social fabric in my life, offering understanding, stimulation, and genuine care without the complicated history and expectations of family relationships. "A toast," Sophia proposed, raising her glass, "to James, who demonstrates daily that wisdom and joy increase rather than diminish with age." As the conversation continued, I found myself reflecting on the stark contrast between the respect and autonomy I experienced among these new friends and the controlling concern Michael had exhibited. The difference illuminated a fundamental truth I was still internalizing. True care empowers rather than diminishes, supports choice rather than imposing it, and recognizes the evolving rather than static nature of identity across the lifespan. Whatever Michael's response to my letter might be, I had established my position from a place of strength rather than defensiveness. The path forward remained uncertain, but I faced that uncertainty with the confidence of someone who had reclaimed her right to self-determination, not as a selfish act, but as the necessary foundation for authentic relationship and meaningful contribution in this new chapter of life. 3 weeks passed with no response from Michael to my certified letter. The silence was neither surprising nor entirely unwelcome. It provided space to strengthen my new life without the distraction of ongoing conflict. During this period, my routine at Oakwood Gardens continued to evolve from tentative exploration to confident engagement. My literary seminar concluded its first 6-week session with enthusiastic requests for a continuation. In response, I designed a second series focused on female authors who challenged societal expectations in different historical periods. The program coordinator added the course to Oakwood's permanent offerings, complete with a modest honorarium that acknowledged the professional value of my contribution. "We're creating a proper faculty from within our resident community," Victoria explained when presenting the formal teaching agreement. Your seminar has demonstrated the exceptional resources that exist among our residents. We're developing similar arrangements with Thomas for culinary arts and Sophia for watercolor instruction. This recognition of expertise, the understanding that retirement hadn't diminished our professional capabilities but rather redirected them, reflected Oakwood's fundamental philosophy that later life could represent enrichment and contribution rather than withdrawal and decline. My involvement in the Resident Advisory Council expanded to include chairing the Cultural Engagement Committee, which coordinated both on-site programming and community excursions. In this capacity, I found myself applying organizational skills, honed through decades of curriculum development and department leadership, but now in service of creating opportunities that I myself would enjoy. The watercolor painting that had begun as casual curiosity was developing into genuine artistic practice. Under Sophia's patient guidance, I progressed from tentative exercises to increasingly confident compositions. The meditative quality of the process, the focus on light, color, and the interaction of pigment with water, provided a form of mindfulness I had never achieved through more structured attempts at meditation. You have a natural affinity for capturing emotional atmosphere, Sophia observed during one of our sessions. Your technical skills are developing nicely, but it's your intuitive sense of mood that gives your work its distinctive quality. On a personal level, my friendship with James continued to deepen, evolving into a relationship that defied simple categorization. We maintained our own separate apartments and independent activities, yet increasingly coordinated our schedules to share experiences. Our connection had developed a comfortable intimacy, the ease of conversation that requires no performance, the companionable silence that carries no awkwardness, the mutual support that expects no scorekeeping. I never anticipated this kind of connection at this stage of life, James confided one evening as we shared dessert after attending a symphony performance. After Louise died, I assumed the partnership aspect of my life was complete. I focused on adjusting to solitude rather than seeking companionship. I understand completely, I replied. After decades of structured relationships, teacher to students, mother to child, there's something remarkably refreshing about a connection that develops solely because two people genuinely enjoy each other's company. This peaceful rhythm was interrupted one afternoon by an unexpected call from Rebecca. Her voice carried an unusual urgency. Eleanor, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but something's happened that you should know about. She paused, then continued with evident difficulty. Michael received your letter and he didn't take it well. He's been consulting with that lawyer friend about challenging your competence, but yesterday he mentioned potentially contacting media outlets about predatory retirement communities targeting vulnerable seniors. The information was concerning but not entirely surprising. Michael had always responded to perceived rejection with escalation rather than reflection, a pattern established in childhood that had evidently persisted into adulthood. Thank you for letting me know, Rebecca, I responded calmly. May I ask why you're sharing this with me? It can't be easy to feel caught between your husband and his mother. Rebecca's answer revealed both her growth and her growing discomfort with Michael's behavior. Because it's wrong. Because what he's planning could hurt not just you, but an entire community that's done nothing except honor your choices. She hesitated before adding, and because I don't want our child to learn that manipulation and control are acceptable ways to treat family members. After thanking Rebecca for her integrity and assuring her that I would handle the situation appropriately, I immediately contacted Patricia Winters to update her on this development. Her response was prompt and decisive. This crosses a line from family disagreement to potential defamation, she noted. I suggest we compose a cease and desist letter outlining the legal consequences of making false public claims about both you and Oakwood Gardens. Additionally, I'd recommend informing Oakwood's legal team so they can prepare appropriate responses should Michael follow through on this threat. That evening, I shared the situation with James during our regular dinner, appreciating his judicial perspective on what had become a genuinely legal matter rather than merely a family conflict. Based on my experience, people who escalate to media threats rarely follow through, he observed thoughtfully. It's typically a pressure tactic rather than a genuine intention. However, having appropriate legal countermeasures prepared is entirely prudent. His balanced assessment helped moderate my emotional response to Michael's behavior. Rather than feeling threatened or victimized, I recognized this as a predictable reaction from someone whose sense of entitlement had been fundamentally challenged. The following afternoon, while returning from a cultural committee meeting, I encountered Victoria in the main atrium. Her expression suggested she had been hoping to find me. "Eleanor, do you have a moment to talk privately? There's a situation I think you should be aware of." In her office, Victoria explained that Oakwood had received a call from a local news blogger known for sensationalist, investigative pieces. He mentioned concerns about financial exploitation of seniors and specifically referenced your situation, though not by name. Our executive director declined to comment on any specific resident matters, but offered information about our rigorous financial counseling and intake procedures. I appreciated both Victoria's transparency and Oakwood's professional handling of the inquiry. "This is related to the family situation I mentioned previously," I explained. "My attorney is preparing a formal response, but I want to assure you that I have no concerns about Oakwood's practices or my decision to become a resident." Victoria's relief was evident. "We've dealt with similar situations before, though rarely involving such specific allegations. Our policy is to respect resident privacy absolutely, while being completely transparent about our operations and financial models." As I contemplated an appropriate response to this escalation, I received an unexpected visit from Margaret, who served as editor of Oakwood's monthly resident newsletter. "Eleanor, I normally wouldn't intrude on a personal matter, but several residents have approached me with concerns," she began carefully. "There's a rather unpleasant blog post circulating online that makes vague accusations about Oakwood isolating wealthy seniors from their families and redirecting family inheritances. It doesn't mention you by name, but given certain details, some residents are wondering if it relates to your situation." The realization that Michael's actions were now affecting the broader community, potentially causing concern among residents who had welcomed me so warmly, crystallized my decision about how to respond. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Margaret, would the newsletter committee be open to publishing a piece about financial autonomy in later life? Not as a direct response to this blog post, but as a thoughtful exploration of an issue many residents have navigated?" Margaret's expression brightened at the constructive approach. "That would be excellent. We've been wanting to address more substantive topics beyond activity announcements and dining reviews. Would you consider writing it yourself? Your perspective would be particularly valuable." The opportunity to transform a personal challenge into a resource for others aligned perfectly with my emerging philosophy about this chapter of life. Rather than allowing Michael's actions to diminish my experience or retreat into defensive privacy, I could channel my response into something constructive for the community that had embraced me. Over the next few days, I crafted an article titled "Financial Sovereignty in Later Life: Navigating Family Expectations and Personal Choices." Without referencing my specific situation, I addressed the complex emotional and practical dimensions of financial decision-making in retirement, incorporating perspectives from several residents who volunteered to share their experiences anonymously. The article acknowledged the genuine concerns adult children might have about parents' welfare, while firmly establishing the fundamental right of capable adults to determine their own financial priorities. It included resources for both seniors facing family pressure and family members struggling to accept changing relationships with aging parents. When the newsletter was published, the response exceeded my expectations. Residents approached me, with appreciation for addressing a topic many had experienced but few had discussed openly. Several mentioned sharing the article with their own adult children to facilitate more productive conversations about financial boundaries. Even more significantly, the community's response to the blog post that had prompted the article was unified support rather than concerned speculation. Instead of creating division or doubt, Michael's attempt to undermine my choice had inadvertently strengthened my position within the Oakwood community. Patricia called with an update shortly after the newsletter's publication. The cease and desist letter has been delivered to both Michael and the blogger who published his allegations. The blogger has already removed the post and published a retraction acknowledging factual inaccuracies in the original content. She paused before adding, "There's been no direct response from Michael yet." That evening, while preparing for a small dinner gathering in my apartment, a celebration of Thomas's successful launch of a cooking class for residents with limited culinary experience, I received a text message from Rebecca. The baby came early. A girl, 6LBZ90Z. We've named her Lily. Michael's not ready to reach out, but I wanted you to know, she's beautiful. The message was accompanied by a photo of a newborn with a surprising amount of dark hair and the distinctive family chin that had passed from my father to me, from me to Michael, and now to his daughter. The sight of this new life, a continuation of family despite the ruptures in relationship, evoked complex emotions of joy, loss, and possibility. I composed a warm response congratulating Rebecca and expressing my delight at Lily's safe arrival, then added, "When you're ready for visitors, I would love to meet my granddaughter. No pressure, no timeline. That decision belongs entirely to you." Setting my phone aside, I returned to preparing for my guests, arranging flowers from Oakwood's cutting garden, and setting out the appetizers James had contributed to our potluck meal. As I moved through these simple, hospitable actions, I reflected on how profoundly my life had transformed in the months since Michael's ultimatum had inadvertently set me on this path of self-reclamation. The conflict remained unresolved, the relationship with my son still fractured. Yet, rather than defining my experience, these painful realities had become merely one aspect of a life rich with new connections, creative pursuits, and meaningful contributions. The capacity to hold both loss and fulfillment, to acknowledge pain without being diminished by it, represented a form of emotional maturity I had not fully achieved until now. When my friends arrived, James, Sophia, Thomas, Margaret, and several others who had become central to my Oakwood experience, the warmth of their company reinforced what I had come to understand: that family extends beyond biological connection to encompass those who recognize and honor our authentic selves. The evening unfolded with conversation, laughter, and the comfortable intimacy of people who had chosen to be present in each other's lives, not from obligation, but from genuine appreciation. Later, after my guests had departed and I stood alone, on my balcony watching moonlight illuminate the gardens below, I silently acknowledged both the cost and the value of the choice I had made. The path of self-determination was neither easy nor painless, but it offered something essential that no amount of compromise or capitulation could provide: the profound satisfaction of living in alignment with one's deepest values and truest self. Lily Elizabeth Carson was 6 weeks old when I met her for the first time. Rebecca had texted me earlier that week, asking if she might visit Oakwood Gardens with the baby. "Michael has a weekend sales conference," she explained. "I thought it might be a good opportunity for you to meet your granddaughter." I arranged for the visit with careful consideration, reserving one of the private reception rooms typically used for family gatherings. The space offered comfortable seating, privacy, and a serene view of the Japanese garden, an environment conducive to the delicate nature of this first meeting. When Rebecca arrived carrying Lily in an infant carrier, I was struck by how tired she looked, the characteristic exhaustion of new motherhood written in the shadows beneath her eyes, and the slight dishevelment of her usually impeccable appearance. Yet there was something else there too, a new softness, a depth that hadn't been present in our previous interactions. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," she said as I welcomed them into the reception room. "Thank you for bringing her," I replied, simply, my attention drawn to the small bundle in the carrier. "May I?" Rebecca nodded, unbuckling Lily and carefully transferring her to my waiting arms. The familiar weight of a newborn, something I hadn't experienced since holding Michael, nearly 4 decades earlier, awakened muscle memories I hadn't realized I'd retained. I instinctively adjusted my hold, cradling Lily's head with practiced support. "She has your eyes," Rebecca observed quietly. "Michael's never mentioned it, but I noticed it immediately in the hospital." Looking down at Lily's face, I recognized the distinctive shape that had passed through generations of my family, slightly almond, with a subtle lift at the outer corners. The recognition brought an unexpected surge of emotion, the tangible evidence of continuity despite rupture. "How are you managing?" I asked Rebecca as we settled into the comfortable chairs, Lily still nestled in my arms. "Honestly, it's harder than I expected." Rebecca's candor was refreshing. "Everyone talks about the sleep deprivation, but no one really prepares you for the isolation. Michael returned to work after 2 weeks and travels frequently for sales meetings. My mother lives in Arizona and can only visit occasionally. Most days it's just Lily and me." As Rebecca described her experiences with first-time motherhood, the challenges, surprises, and moments of overwhelming love, I noticed a significant shift in her manner. Gone was the calculating ambition that had characterized our early interactions, replaced by a vulnerability and authenticity I hadn't previously glimpsed. "I keep thinking about our conversation before you moved," she admitted, watching as I gently rocked Lily. "How you said you were choosing yourself after decades of putting others first. I didn't understand then, but I'm beginning to now. Motherhood consumes you entirely if you let it." "It can," I acknowledged. "But it doesn't have to eliminate your personhood. Finding that balance is the challenge, honoring the maternal role without being reduced to it exclusively." Our conversation continued with surprising ease, touching on practical aspects of infant care, Rebecca's plans to eventually resume her career in marketing, and her mixed feelings about the suburban lifestyle she and Michael had emphasized so strongly before Lily's birth. "The house we wanted in Lakeside Estates?" she said, shaking her head slightly. "It would have been a financial disaster. We couldn't really afford it, which is why Michael was so fixated on your retirement funds. The monthly payments would have been unsustainable, especially with me on maternity leave." The admission confirmed what I had suspected, that their pressure regarding my resources had been driven by financial overreach rather than genuine concern for my welfare. Yet rather than feeling vindicated, I felt a complex sadness for the strain such financial pressure must have placed on their relationship during what should have been a joyful period of anticipation. When Lily began to fuss, Rebecca prepared a bottle. "Would you like to feed her?" she offered, extending the prepared formula. The invitation carried significance beyond the simple act of feeding an infant. It represented Rebecca's willingness to include me in her daughter's care, to acknowledge my place in Lily's life, despite the ongoing tension with Michael. As I held Lily close, watching her focused concentration on the bottle, I experienced a wave of perspective that transcended the conflicts of recent months. This moment, this connection to new life, to future possibility, existed independently of financial disagreements or power struggles. It represented something more fundamental about family continuity and the capacity for relationships to evolve beyond impasse. "She'll be ready for her nap soon," Rebecca noted as Lily's eyelids grew heavy. "Would you mind holding her while I use the restroom? I haven't had a moment to myself all morning." When Rebecca returned several minutes later, looking marginally refreshed, she found me walking slowly around the room, humming softly to the now sleeping Lily. The scene seemed to affect her deeply. "You're a natural with her," she observed, reclaiming her seat rather than immediately taking Lily back. I should have guessed you would be, having raised Michael. It's like riding a bicycle, I smiled. The body remembers even when the mind has forgotten. Rebecca hesitated, then spoke with evident care. Eleanor, I want to be transparent with you about Michael. He's still angry. About your decision, about the legal letter, about everything. He feels rejected and replaced, like Oakwood has somehow stolen his mother. And what do you think? I asked, continuing my gentle movement with Lily. I think he's wrong, she answered directly. Being here today, seeing how you've created this life for yourself, understanding that your decision wasn't about abandoning family, but about honoring your own needs. She shook her head. The contrast between your approach and Michael's is stark. You're respecting my autonomy as Lily's mother while maintaining clear boundaries. Michael tries to control every situation, including how I parent. The assessment was surprisingly insightful, suggesting Rebecca had been observing and analyzing family dynamics with greater acuity than I had credited her with previously. Marriage and parenthood reveal patterns we don't always recognize in ourselves, I offered. Michael learned early that control provided a sense of security. His father's abandonment left him with deep uncertainty that he compensates for through managing his environment and the people in it. Rebecca nodded. That explains a lot, actually. His rigidity about schedules, his discomfort with spontaneity, his need to handle all our finances despite my business degree. We continued this more analytical discussion as Lily slept peacefully in my arms, exploring the complex interplay of past experience and present behavior without judgment or defensiveness. It was perhaps the most honest conversation I had ever had about my son with someone who loved him, acknowledging both his strengths and his struggles with compassionate clarity. Eventually, Rebecca checked her watch reluctantly. We should probably head back. I promised Michael I'd call him when we got home from our shopping trip. He doesn't know we're here. As I carefully transferred the sleeping Lily back to her carrier, I considered how to respond to this revelation. Rather than expressing disapproval of the deception, I chose to acknowledge the complexity of Rebecca's position. You're navigating a difficult situation with integrity, Rebecca. Finding the balance between respecting your husband and following your own moral compass isn't easy. No, it isn't, she agreed, securing Lily's tiny form in the carrier. But having Lily has clarified certain priorities for me. I want her to grow up understanding that family relationships should be based on mutual respect rather than control or obligation. That includes her relationship with her grandmother. Before they departed, I showed Rebecca several photographs I had selected as gifts, images of Michael as an infant and toddler that captured moments of joy and discovery similar to what she was experiencing with Lily. These belong in your family album, I explained. Whatever tensions exist between Michael and me, they shouldn't erase the happy parts of his childhood. Rebecca accepted the photos with evident emotion. Thank you. These mean more than you know. She hesitated, then added, I'd like to bring Lily again, if that's all right. Maybe make it a regular thing. I'd like that very much, I replied. And Rebecca? When Michael is ready, if he becomes ready, my door remains open. Not for financial negotiations or power struggles, but for genuine reconciliation based on mutual respect. After they left, I took a reflective walk through Oakwood's expansive gardens, processing the complex emotions evoked by meeting my granddaughter and experiencing this unexpected evolution in my relationship with Rebecca. The visit represented both possibility and limitation, a bridge forming to the next generation even as the connection to my son remained tenuous. That evening, I shared the experience with James during our regular dinner. His thoughtful response reflected both his judicial background and his personal wisdom. Family healing rarely follows a linear path, he observed. Sometimes connections reform through unexpected channels, like Rebecca's independent relationship with you, or your new bond with Lily. These alternative pathways often prove more durable than forced reconciliations through the most damaged relationship. I hope Michael eventually finds his way back, I admitted, not to the old dynamic, but to a healthier connection. He might, James acknowledged. But your happiness and fulfillment can't depend on that possibility. What you're building here, both, in terms of community and personal development, has intrinsic value regardless of how family relationships evolve. The wisdom in his perspective resonated deeply. While I continued to hope for eventual healing with Michael, my daily experience had expanded far beyond that single relationship. My literary seminars had developed into a formal humanities program at Oakwood, with guest speakers from local universities complementing resident-led discussions. My watercolor painting had progressed to exhibition quality, with 3 works selected for Oakwood's annual art show. My role on the resident advisory council had evolved to include mentoring new community members through their transition. Most significantly, my friendship with James had deepened into a relationship that defied conventional categories, neither romantic in the traditional sense, nor merely platonic, but rather a profound partnership based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine care. We maintained our separate residences, but began referring to ourselves as partners, acknowledging the central role we had come to play in each other's lives. Later that week, I received a small package delivered to my apartment. Inside was a framed photograph of Lily wearing a hand-knitted sweater in soft yellow, along with a note in Rebecca's handwriting. Eleanor. This was taken the day after our visit. I thought you might want a current photo for your home. The sweater was a gift from my mother, but the expression is pure Eleanor. That same thoughtful gaze I've seen in your eyes and Michael's. Thank you for showing me what graceful strength looks like. I'm learning. Rebecca. I placed the photograph on my bookshelf alongside other treasured images. My parents on their 50th anniversary, Michael's college graduation, a group photo, from my retirement celebration, and a recent image of James and me at the Symphony Gala. Together, these photographs represented not a linear family narrative, but a constellation of meaningful connections across different phases of life. That evening, attending a lecture in Oakwood's auditorium on Reinvention and Renaissance in Later Life, I found myself nodding in recognition as the speaker described the profound shift from role-based identity to authentic self-expression that often occurs in the third act of life. Many of us spend decades defining ourselves through professional titles and family roles, the speaker noted. The liberation of later life comes when we recognize that our value doesn't depend on utility to others, but on the full expression of our unique gifts and perspectives. Looking around at my fellow residents, individuals who had been corporate executives, research scientists, educators, artists, and entrepreneurs, I saw the living embodiment of this principle. None of us had abandoned our past identities or contributions, but we had transcended being defined exclusively by them. We were actively creating lives characterized by ongoing growth, meaningful connection, and continued purpose. Meeting Lily had reinforced rather than contradicted this journey. Being a grandmother would certainly be one aspect of my identity moving forward, but it would exist alongside being an educator, artist, community leader, and partner, not as a replacement for these dimensions or as my primary defining role. As I walked back to my apartment under a star-filled sky, I reflected on the remarkable path that had brought me to this point. What had begun as a painful ultimatum, serve his fiancée or give him my savings, had catalyzed a transformation far beyond financial independence. It had initiated a profound reclamation of selfhood after decades of defining my worth primarily through service to others. The journey hadn't been without cost. The relationship with my son remained strained, the hurt of his attempts to control and diminish me still tender. Yet even this ongoing challenge had yielded unexpected gifts: the emergence of an authentic connection with Rebecca, the joy of meeting my granddaughter, and perhaps most significantly, the discovery of my own resilience and capacity for happiness, independent of family approval. These realizations didn't eliminate the hope for eventual reconciliation with Michael, but they placed that possibility in proper perspective, as one potential aspect of my future rather than the determining factor in my present fulfillment. This shift represented perhaps the most profound liberation of all, the freedom to love without dependency, to hope without condition, and to live with wholehearted engagement regardless of others' choices or limitations. Autumn at Oakwood Gardens brought a spectacular transformation to the grounds. The landscaping design, thoughtfully planned for year-round visual interest, reached its pinnacle as maples blazed in crimson and gold, ornamental grasses took on amber hues, and late blooming perennials offered final bursts of color before winter's dormancy. Morning walks with James became a celebration of seasonal transition, each day revealing subtle changes in the landscape. "I've always loved autumn," James remarked as we followed the path around the property's small lake. "There's wisdom in how nature demonstrates that change and beauty are inseparable. That transformation can be breathtaking even when it involves letting go." 6 months into my residency at Oakwood, this philosophy of transformative release resonated deeply. Each aspect of my new life represented something embraced rather than something relinquished, connection rather than isolation, purpose rather than idleness, growth rather than stagnation. My relationship with Rebecca had developed into regular visits, typically once every 2 weeks. She would bring Lily to Oakwood, and we would spend several hours together in comfortable conversation while the baby slept, fed, or observed her surroundings, with increasing alertness as she grew. These visits occurred during Michael's frequent business trips or scheduled meetings, a delicate arrangement that both Rebecca and I recognized as temporary but necessary given the current circumstances. During one such visit in late October, as Lily approached 3 months old, Rebecca arrived with evident distress beneath her composed exterior. After the usual exchange of greetings and updates on Lily's development, she confided the source of her concern. "Michael found the photographs you gave me," she explained, bouncing Lily gently as the baby began to fuss. "He was looking for insurance documents in my desk and discovered them in a folder. He was upset." "I imagine he was," I acknowledged, offering to take Lily while Rebecca prepared a bottle. "How did you handle the situation?" Rebecca's response revealed her growing confidence in navigating the complex family dynamics. "I told him the truth, that I had brought Lily to meet you, and that I believe she deserves a relationship with her grandmother regardless of adult disagreements." She passed Lily to me, then began organizing the feeding supplies. "I also told him that maintaining these visits isn't negotiable for me. Lily shouldn't pay the price for conflicts that began before she was born." The assertion of such clear boundaries represented significant growth from the Rebecca I had first met, the woman who had initially approached me as a potential resource rather than a person deserving respect. Her evolution reminded me that capacity for change wasn't limited to any particular life stage. "How did he respond to your position?" I asked, settling Lily comfortably in my arms. Rebecca's expression reflected both concern and determination. "He accused me of betrayal, of undermining his authority in our family." She paused, carefully measuring formula into a bottle. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of escalating or making demands, he just went quiet. Later that evening, he asked questions about how you were doing, what your apartment was like, whether you seemed happy here. This development, though modest, suggested potential shifts in Michael's perspective, perhaps the beginning of curiosity about my actual experience, rather than adherence to his predetermined narrative about my decision. "That sounds like progress," I offered cautiously. "Maybe," Rebecca agreed, testing the formula temperature on her wrist. "He hasn't explicitly forbidden our visits, which is something. But neither has he expressed any interest in reconciliation." She handed me the prepared bottle. I did mention that you've made it clear you're open to rebuilding your relationship when he's ready. As Lily fed contentedly, Rebecca shared updates about their home situation. Michael's business had stabilized after a difficult period, reducing some of the financial pressure that had contributed to his fixation on my resources. They had decided to remain in their current house rather than pursuing the larger property. In Lakeside Estates, a choice Rebecca described as right-sizing our expectations. Watching you create this life for yourself has been eye-opening for me, she admitted. You've demonstrated that contentment comes from alignment with your values, not from accumulating status symbols or meeting others' expectations. Her observation highlighted an unexpected aspect of my journey, that my choice to honor my own needs had created ripple effects beyond my personal experience, potentially influencing Rebecca's approach to her marriage and parenting choices. Without deliberate intention, my example had offered an alternative model to the materialistic, appearance-focused values that had initially characterized Rebecca's worldview. After Rebecca and Lily departed, I attended a meeting of the Resident Education Committee, where we were finalizing plans for Oakwood's winter lecture series. My proposal for a program titled Literary Reflections on Life Transitions had been enthusiastically approved, and I was working with the coordinators to secure guest speakers from nearby universities to complement the resident-led discussions. We've confirmed Professor Emerita Diane Wu from Riverside College for the session on memoir and personal narrative, reported Margaret, who had become my close collaborator on educational programming. She was particularly interested in our approach of integrating academic perspectives with lived experience. The validation from established scholars reinforced what many residents had already recognized, that our accumulated wisdom and reflection represented valuable intellectual capital rather than outdated thinking. This recognition contrasted sharply with the dismissive attitude toward senior perspectives often encountered in broader society, including Michael's assumption that my decision-making capacity had diminished rather than evolved with age. That evening, preparing for a small dinner gathering in my apartment, I received an unexpected email notification. The sender's name caused me to pause. Michael Carson. After 6 months of no direct communication, this represented a significant development. I seated myself at my desk, taking a moment to center my thoughts before opening the message. Whatever its content, I wanted to receive it from a place of emotional stability rather than reactive vulnerability. The email was brief, but consequential. Mom, Rebecca has shared that she's been bringing Lily to visit you regularly. While I initially felt uncomfortable with this arrangement, I've come to recognize that my daughter deserves to know her grandmother. I'm still processing my feelings about your decision and its implications for our family. However, I want to acknowledge that my approach to the situation has been inappropriate at times. The legal threats and attempt to publicly discredit Oakwood were reactions I'm not proud of. Rebecca suggested that I might join them for their next visit if you're open to it. This wouldn't be about financial matters or past grievances, just a first step toward civil communication. Michael. The message, though lacking emotional warmth or explicit apology, represented significant movement from Michael's previous position. The acknowledgement of inappropriate behavior, however restrained, indicated some level of reflection and reconsideration. I composed a measured response, welcoming his potential visit while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Michael, thank you for reaching out. I would be glad to have you join Rebecca and Lily during their next visit to Oakwood. As you suggested, focusing on moving forward rather than revisiting past conflicts seems the most constructive approach. Lily is a joy, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to know her. She has your chin and my eyes, a lovely continuation of family resemblance across generations. I look forward to seeing you when you're ready. Mom. After sending the reply, I continued preparations for my dinner guests, chopping vegetables for a seasonal soup while classical music played softly in the background. The potential reconciliation with Michael added a layer of hopeful anticipation to my evening. But it didn't overshadow the immediate pleasure of creating a welcoming environment for the friends who had become such an important part of my daily life. James arrived early, bringing freshly baked bread from Oakwood's artisan bakery and a bottle of wine selected from the community's well-stocked cellar. As we worked together to complete the dinner preparations, I shared Michael's email and my response. "This is a positive development," James observed, his judicial training evident in his measured assessment. "The acknowledgement of inappropriate behavior, however limited, suggests he's beginning to recognize how his actions appear to others. That's often the first step toward genuine change." "I'm cautiously optimistic," I acknowledged. "Though I'm also aware that reconciliation, if it happens, will likely be incremental rather than transformative. Michael's fundamental personality, his need for control, his difficulty with emotional vulnerability, isn't going to change dramatically." "True," James agreed, arranging bread in a basket. "But sometimes relationships can improve significantly even when personalities remain consistent. It's about finding new ways to interact within the existing framework of who we are, not expecting fundamental rewrites of character." This perspective, that growth could occur within realistic parameters rather than requiring idealized transformation, reflected the wisdom James brought to all areas of his life. It was one of the qualities I most valued in our partnership. His ability to balance optimism with pragmatism, to hope for the best while preparing for the complexity of human relationships. Our dinner guests that evening included Sophia and her husband Robert, Thomas, Margaret, and two newer residents, Elena and Gabriel, who had moved to Oakwood just weeks earlier. The conversation flowed easily, touching on current events, books, mutual interests, and community happenings without the strained politeness or superficial exchanges that often characterize social gatherings. Elena, a retired anthropologist whose research had focused on community structures across cultures, observed the dynamic with professional interest. "What strikes me about Oakwood," she noted during dessert, "is how quickly authentic community forms here compared to traditional neighborhoods. There's a quality of intentional connection that's rare in modern American society." "I think it's because we've all chosen to be here," Thomas suggested. "Unlike family or workplace relationships, which involve elements of obligation or necessity, our community is formed through active selection rather than circumstance." "There's also the freedom from performance," Sophia added. "At this stage of life, most of us have abandoned the need to impress others with status markers or achievements. We can simply be ourselves without constant self-marketing." The discussion evolved into a thoughtful exploration of authentic community versus obligatory association, a topic that resonated deeply given my evolving understanding of family relationships. By evening's end, when guests departed with warm embraces and plans for future gatherings, I felt once again the profound value of connections formed through genuine affinity rather than external expectation. Later that night, preparing for bed, I reflected on the contrast between my current social experience and the dynamics that had characterized my relationship with Michael and Rebecca just 6 months earlier. The difference wasn't merely in the quality of interactions, but in the fundamental nature of connection, relationships based on mutual respect and appreciation rather than utility or obligation. This shift extended beyond personal relationships to my broader experience at Oakwood. My literary seminars had evolved from casual discussions to structured programs that meaningfully engaged participants' intellect and experience. My watercolor painting had progressed from tentative exploration to genuine artistic expression, with several works selected for display in Oakwood's gallery. My role on various resident committees had transformed from basic participation to leadership that drew on my organizational and interpersonal skills. In each area, I had moved from hesitant newcomer to confident contributor, not by diminishing myself to fit others' expectations, but by fully expressing capabilities that had always existed, but rarely found complete expression when subordinated to primary identities as mother, teacher, or caregiver. The possibility of reconciliation with Michael, while welcome, existed within this broader context of personal flourishing. Whatever path that relationship might take, gradual healing, limited civility, or something in between, it would represent just one aspect of a multifaceted life rather than its defining feature. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself experiencing a sensation that had become increasingly familiar over recent months. Profound gratitude for the ultimatum that had initially seemed so painful. Michael's demand that I either serve his fiancée or give him my savings had catalyzed a journey I might otherwise never have undertaken. A journey not merely to different living arrangements, but to a fundamentally different relationship with myself and my place in the world. The irony wasn't lost on me that in attempting to diminish my autonomy, Michael had inadvertently propelled me toward its fullest expression. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive in the most unlikely packaging, and the most significant growth emerges from circumstances we would never willingly choose. The morning of Michael's planned visit arrived with crystalline autumn clarity. Overnight, frost had touched the gardens, transforming ordinary foliage into glittering sculptures that caught the early sunlight. I found myself awake before dawn, watching this transformation from my balcony while preparing mentally for the day ahead. My expectations were measured. After 6 months of estrangement followed by a single brief email, I harbored no illusions about instant reconciliation or dramatic emotional breakthroughs. The best outcome would be a civil beginning, a foundation upon which we might gradually rebuild communication and mutual respect. I had arranged for us to meet in one of Oakwood's private reception rooms rather than my personal apartment. This neutral space would provide comfort and privacy, while avoiding the potential intensity of welcoming Michael directly into my home during this initial reconnection. Victoria had ensured the room was prepared thoughtfully. Comfortable seating arranged for conversation rather than confrontation. Refreshments available but unobtrusive. Natural light from large windows overlooking the gardens. At precisely the arranged time, the reception desk notified me that my visitors had arrived. Taking a deep, centering breath, I walked to meet them. Rebecca entered first, carrying Lily in her infant seat. Her expression conveyed both encouragement and apprehension, clearly hoping for positive interaction while prepared for potential tension. Michael followed a step behind, his posture revealing the discomfort he was working to conceal. He had dressed formally in business attire, as if attending a professional meeting rather than a family gathering. "Hello, Michael," I greeted him directly, maintaining eye contact while keeping my tone warm but composed. "Thank you for coming." He nodded stiffly. "Mom, you're looking well." The observation seemed to surprise him slightly, as if he had expected physical changes that weren't evident. In truth, my appearance had evolved during these months at Oakwood, though not in the ways he might have anticipated. Regular swimming and yoga classes had improved my posture and energy. The release from chronic stress had softened the tension lines around my eyes. Most significantly, the consistent engagement in activities I genuinely enjoyed had brought a vitality that no cosmetic intervention could achieve. "Thank you. Please, come in and make yourselves comfortable." Rebecca moved with practiced efficiency, settling Lily's carrier and organizing the seemingly endless accessories that accompany infant care. Michael stood awkwardly until Rebecca gestured toward the chair beside her, prompting him to sit. "Would anyone like refreshments?" I offered, indicating the service arranged discreetly on a side table. "There's coffee, tea, and some pastries. From Oakwood's bakery." Rebecca accepted gratefully, mentioning that they had rushed through breakfast to arrive on time. Michael declined initially but reconsidered when he noticed the quality of the offerings. "These are made here?" he asked, selecting a perfectly executed almond croissant. "Yes, our culinary program is exceptional," I explained. "The head chef previously worked at the Grand Meridian downtown, and he trains apprentices from the local culinary school." This simple exchange about pastries seemed to ease some of the initial tension. Food, I reflected, often provides neutral conversational territory when emotions might otherwise dominate. For the next several minutes, Rebecca facilitated interaction by updating me on Lily's recent developments, her improved head control, emerging sleep patterns, and first social smiles. Throughout this exchange, I noticed Michael watching me, carefully, perhaps assessing how I responded to news about his daughter. When Rebecca excused herself briefly to change Lily's diaper in the adjacent family restroom, Michael and I faced our first moment alone together since our confrontation 6 months earlier. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.